generation on both sides of the Atlantic. The United States and Europe have shown what we can do when we come together. Our response in confronting the immediate crisis we face today, ending Vladimir Putin's brutal war against Ukraine and its people, is a clear demonstration. But we can go further. We can extend this potent transatlantic cooperation to address many of the other shared challenges we face. Tommaso Padoa-Schioppa was a person who thought big. Of course, he's best remembered for his commitment to an integrated Europe and his seminal contributions to central banking and the creation of the euro. His life's work was based on an optimism about what could be achieved through probing technical analysis and informed collaboration. At the same time, he was not shy about pointing out what he saw as weaknesses or shortfalls with the approaches of the day. Shortfalls that, if left unaddressed, would undermine a more prosperous and secure Europe, and indeed a secure world. As we look to the future, we should take this inspiration from Tommaso's legacy. Be open to challenge, improve, and where necessary, replace existing approaches as we consider how to respond to the questions before us today. I want to start by highlighting areas where the United States and Europe are already strong partners, areas where we have more to do, but where our cooperation is already producing promising results. The most tangible example is our joint response to Vladimir Putin's unprovoked war against Ukraine and its people. The war is taking a devastating human toll, with lives tragically lost, families internally displaced or becoming refugees, and communities and cities destroyed. We have taken a strong and united stand against Russia's heinous actions. And thanks to our unity, we have seen that swift and sweeping sanctions can have enormous force. The United States, Europe, and our partners, representing well over half the world's economy, have imposed an unprecedented suite of financial sanctions and export controls on Russia. This multilateral approach has enabled us to impose significant costs and limits on Russia, which I believe are degrading its ability to prosecute this war and project power in the years ahead. By acting together, we demonstrate that these sanctions are not motivated by any one country's foreign policy or economic objectives. Rather, we're acting to uphold principles, our opposition to aggression, to widespread violence against civilians, and in alignment with our commitment to a rules-based global order that protects peace and prosperity. And by standing together, we ensure that Russia cannot play off some of us against others. Rest assured, if Putin continues his heinous war of choice, the Biden administration will work with you and our other partners to push Russia further towards economic, financial, and strategic isolation. More and more, the Kremlin will be forced to choose between propping up its economy and funding the continuation of Putin's brutal war. Now, we need to extend our cooperation to boosting support for Ukraine. Ukraine's immediate financing needs are significant. Due to the ingenuity and bravery of Ukrainian officials, their government continues to function. But in the months until tax collection can resume at pace, Ukraine needs budget funding to pay soldiers, employees, and pensioners, as well as to operate an economy that meets its citizens' basic needs. In short order, we'll need to turn to repairing and restoring critical utilities and services. Eventually, Ukraine will need massive support and private investment for reconstruction and recovery, akin to the task of rebuilding in Europe after 1945. Ukraine will have to take this one step at a time, but we can help today and acknowledge and prepare for what is coming. What's clear is that the bilateral and multilateral support announced so far will not be sufficient to address Ukraine's needs, even in the short term. That's why President Biden has called on the U.S. Congress to provide an additional $33 billion in security, economic, and humanitarian aid. And I sincerely ask all our partners to join us in increasing their financial support to Ukraine. Our joint efforts are critical to help ensure Ukraine's democracy prevails over Putin's aggression. Another recent example of transatlantic cooperation is the international tax deal. This past October, 137 countries, including all the EU member states and the United States, came together to support an historic deal that will reshape the international tax system. This agreement simply could not have happened without close coordination between the United States and Europe. Through intense engagement, we listened to one another regarding our respective interests and challenges, and we were able to come to an agreement. We also brought in the rest of the world, including developing and emerging economies, so that the agreement met all countries' needs. Pillar 2 of this deal establishes a minimum effective global corporate tax rate. Countries have agreed to tax the foreign earnings of their multinational corporations at a rate of at least 15%, and to do so on a country-by-country basis. This agreement will halt a decades-long race to the bottom in corporate taxation around the globe, a competition that has proven self-defeating. Once implemented, we can put the revenues produced by this deal toward funding investments to make our economies more sustainable and fairer, not just in the United States and the EU, but also in emerging and developing countries. And by moving together, we will raise these revenues in a way that levels the playing field. Businesses will be able to compete on economic fundamentals rather than on tax incentives, thereby contributing to our collective prosperity. Pillar 1 of this deal, focused on the taxation of digital services, puts an end to trade tensions between the EU and the United States that threaten our companies with multiple layers of taxation and our consumers with rising costs from tariffs. That dynamic just isn't good for anyone. Pillar 1 will also update and stabilize the international tax architecture, providing a fairer allocation of revenues than the status quo, and tax certainty that's good for business and investment. Rather than facing harmful unilateral measures, companies will be able to plan and thus invest their capital efficiently. We cannot rest on our laurels. We still have important work to do to get international tax reform across the finish line. We must resolve the open issues in Pillar 1 so that the multilateral treaty can be ready for signature. And on Pillar 2, the EU and the United States must show leadership by expeditiously implementing the global minimum tax in our domestic laws. Our sanctions against Russia and the international tax deal are tangible recent examples of what we can achieve when we work together. These experiences can serve as inspiration as we consider the breadth of unmet challenges that would also benefit from such ambitious cooperation. First, we must address the present energy security emergency to ensure supply for Europe and the world, while using this as our moment to rapidly accelerate the transition to clean energy. We know that tackling climate change is becoming more urgent. The recent IPCC reports confirm that our window of opportunity to leave a livable planet to future generations is even closer to being permanently shut. At the same time, Russia's war against Ukraine is having immediate impacts on the availability of oil and gas, which continue to account for 4/5 of global energy production used to power economies today. I know that Europe is facing a uniquely difficult situation given existing infrastructure and supply contracts with Russia over the near term. That's why I commend European leaders for their proposal to phase out all Russian energy supplies within 6 months. And I recognize the solidarity of the European people in accepting the implications of this proposal. Russia's war and its recent decision to cut gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria, threatening other countries with the same, show it is not a trusted partner. Russia is using energy as a weapon to deploy against those who stand against its aggression. The United States is committed to working with Europe in your efforts to meet your energy needs while also breaking dependence on Russian energy. This includes working with other partners to increase export volumes of LNG to Europe. As we do so, we must heed this wake-up call to expedite the global transition to a more secure and cleaner energy future. No country controls the wind and the sun. Let's make sure that this is the last time that the global economy is held hostage to the hostile actions of those who produce fossil fuels. This will happen again if we don't change our approach. In the near term, we will likely see an uptick in coal and other fossil fuel usage as countries seek to keep legacy assets online longer. And if this blunts some of our immediate climate goals for a short period, let it also prod us to redouble our efforts on clean and renewable energy. We know that the key to sustainable energy security lies in the development and deployment of renewable and zero-emissions energy. Remember that renewables already account for over 80% of new electric generating capacity globally. Why? Because they're often cheaper and less subject to price spikes and external market volatility. Over the medium term, we need to dramatically ramp up renewables, invest in new technologies, and increase support for energy efficiency measures to reduce energy demand. Depending on how long higher energy prices last, we should see some natural supply responses and new technologies deployed. And the longer the current disruption lasts, the more aggressively we say no to Russian oil, the more remunerative it will naturally become to switch to renewables. Second, we must modernize the approaches we have used to build trade integration, both to better incorporate our shared core values and principles and to provide economic security. We have become too vulnerable to countries using their market positions in raw materials, technologies, or products to exercise geopolitical leverage or disrupt markets for their own gain. For example, the development of dependence on Russian oil favored cost and convenience over concentration risk and considerations of security. And energy is not the only example of trading off cost against security. Russia is also a large supplier of key minerals, and we've long accepted a significant dependence on China for the supply of rare earths. These minerals and materials comprise vital inputs in aviation, vehicle production, battery manufacture, renewable energy systems, and technology manufacturing. China is responsible for 60% of rare earth mining and nearly 40% of reserves, giving the country geostrategic leverage. While many of these materials are abundant in the earth, they are costly and in some instances polluting to extract. In addition, China is building a consequential market share in certain technology products and seeks a dominant position in the manufacture and use of semiconductors. And China's employed a variety of unfair trade practices in its efforts to achieve this position. We have a set of common vulnerabilities that we should address. Another rather different but relevant example is solar panels, where our concern is not security, but rather the clash between our human rights values and the cost advantage of buying these products at a time when we're eager to achieve decarbonization. My point is to suggest that we should consider ways to maintain free trade and at the same time lessen some of these risks. We do not want a retreat from trade integration, causing us to forego the benefits it brings to the world. But as the economist Richard Baldwin said, putting all your production eggs in one basket doesn't make sense, no matter where the basket is. The recent crises have shown us that, in most cases, it's more secure to have multiple sourcing that is not fully correlated. What I'm proposing is that we properly account for the externalities stemming from these other considerations: concentration, geopolitical concerns, security risks, and values. In the case of rare earths, numerous other countries possess these resources, and it's in our collective interest for them to pursue greater extraction with care for environmental and other consequences. With high-tech manufactured products, it may make sense to create incentives for multiple supply chain alternatives to arise, with smaller market shares and with more trusted countries. I believe that we need to consider how to incentivize the friendshoring of supply chains to a greater number of trusted countries for a variety of products, so we can continue to securely extend market access with lower risks to our economy as well as to those of our trade partners. Third, we must improve the global health architecture to enhance our resilience to future pandemics. The COVID-19 pandemic has cost us millions of lives, trillions of dollars in lost economic output, and severely impacted health systems around the world. It's also revealed how unprepared we were at the national, regional, and global levels to address health threats that know no boundaries. So even as we work to overcome COVID-19, we must strengthen our collective efforts to prevent the next pandemic and be ready with detection, data sharing, and treatment strategies. Efforts to tackle the pandemic, including through the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, provide some useful lessons for strengthening collaboration. G20 countries are also working with a range of international partners through a joint health and finance task force to strengthen cooperation across the health and finance communities to address the current gaps in the international health architecture. This includes closing the estimated $10 billion per year shortfall in investments in pandemic preparedness. Several countries have agreed to support a financial intermediary fund as a flexible mechanism to help fill the gaps in health system investments at the country, regional, and global levels. We look forward to strong European support in launching this funding mechanism next year. And finally, we need to revisit our approach to development financing to meet the vast unmet needs and better respond to more global challenges. We're already working together to address the spillovers of Russia's war against Ukraine, while many developing countries are still grappling with strained policy space and output losses from COVID-19. Our cooperation, alongside the G20 and many other partners around the world, has included unprecedented funding levels, novel debt relief initiatives, and a heightened focus on addressing long-standing food security challenges. We must also think beyond the immediate development priorities. As many as 10 billion people are yet to be born in this century. And the reality is that most of these people will be born outside of the United States and Europe. The last couple of centuries have featured the rise of the West. But it's clear that the promise of the next several generations will include other geographies. Fulfilling that promise will require significant investments in areas such as education, healthcare, and sustainable infrastructure. We've also seen that our current models for funding global public goods, like climate adaptation and mitigation, healthy security, and fragility, are insufficient. To finance these immense needs, we need to look beyond our current models. As official development finance, helpful as it may be, will never be sufficient. The question is how to tap the much deeper pools of private capital to mobilize the trillions needed to deliver on the aspirations of the next generation. We should take bold action because of the moral imperative to eliminate poverty and provide opportunities for young people around the world. And of course, a more prosperous global economy will also have direct benefits for Americans and Europeans, fueling growth and jobs at home, as well as greater peace and security. There is a strong case for pursuing common goals jointly, not unilaterally. For example, we have a common interest in incentivizing China to refrain from economic practices that have disadvantaged all of us. These practices range from those affecting trade and investment to development and climate policies, to approaches to provide debt relief to countries facing unsustainable debt burdens. Where we share common interests, we should all find ways to engage with China and express our views. And China is more likely to respond favorably if it cannot play one of us off against the other. The Biden administration believes that cooperation of this kind will be more effective than the unilateralism that we saw in the not-too-distant past. We should all aspire to encouraging China to drop objectionable practices. If we can do so, we will stand a better chance of competing with China on a level playing field, which will benefit our businesses and consumers. And we will have a stronger basis for convincing China to join us in the many important areas where truly global cooperation is necessary. So, to conclude, let me turn back to Tommaso Padoa-Schioppa. despite all he accomplished, with his vision for a more integrated Europe realized, Tommaso never stopped pressing for greater cooperation to address shortcomings and strengthen our global system. Indeed, one of his last speeches notably called for renewed cooperation to remedy the global financial crisis and build an international monetary system that would prevent its recurrence. We have before us now an immense array of challenges. So let's think big and let's do it together. We must redouble our efforts to create opportunity, a sustainable environment, and ultimately widespread and sustainable prosperity now and for our children's children. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much to Secretary Yellen there, the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, kicking off the Brussels Economic Forum 2022 and really setting out the long list of challenges that both the European Union and the United States have together. And Secretary Yellen mentioned climate change in her opening address. She mentioned the energy emergency, and those are the precise themes that we'll be looking at today at the Brussels Economic Forum 2022. We'll be talking about the green transition, about making this continent carbon neutral by 2050, and how to accelerate this transition with the war in Ukraine in mind and wean off Russian oil and gas. Because we hear from Frans Timmermans all the time that the EU Green Deal will bring about benefits in economic and social terms. But of course, and he always mentions, it will bring about costs. And it will unevenly hit regions, sectors and populations. So the big question today that we have is how to make sure this transition is fair, how to make sure it leaves nobody behind and avoid a backlash across the continent of Europe. For more on this in just a minute, we'll be crossing over to Naomi Lloyd, who'll be introducing some fantastic panelists. She'll be joined up here on stage by Valdis Dombrovskis. That's the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, who's physically with us here at the Brussels Economic Forum. And she'll also be joined by Luc Triangle, the General Secretary from the European Trade Union. And she'll have some remote guests as well joining us. From Spain, she'll have Teresa Ribera, the third Vice President, the Minister for Ecological Transition, and Ilham Kadri to get the perspective from industry. That's, of course, the Chief Executive Officer from Solvay. So we'll be hearing just a minute from her. Her guests are just coming up. Okay. And don't forget, you can reach out to Naomi during that panel on Twitter and on Slido to make sure that your comments and questions get out there. Naomi.
Many thanks indeed, Maeve, and welcome to our first panel of the day. Just to quickly reintroduce our guests again, we have Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Valdis Dombrovskis, the General Secretary of the Industrial European Trade Union, Luc Triangle, and joining us remotely, we have Spain's Minister for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge, Teresa Ribera. And we have the CEO of Belgian multinational chemical company Solvay, Ilham Kadri. A very warm welcome to all of you remotely on stage. And just before we get started, we are going to be hearing from a younger voice, which in just a moment Maeve is going to introduce. And I can perhaps tell you a little bit about the young economist we're going to be hearing from. So it's Diego Kenzig, and Maeve, I'll let you take over from there to introduce him before we start our panel.
Absolutely, Naomi, because as we said, this Brussels Economic Forum is all about young people. We want to hear from young economists. So I'll be joined now by Diego. Diego Kenzig, you can come up on stage right now. Ladies and gentlemen, and those of you joining us online, Diego Kenzig is a PhD candidate in economics, and he's also the winner of the 2021 ECB Young Economics Competition. His research shows how climate change and inequality have important implications for the business cycle. But Diego, you know more about your research, so enlighten us. Tell us more about it, and why did you decide to focus on this specific topic?
Thank you so much, Maeve. I do believe that climate change is really the defining challenge of our time, posing significant risks to our lives, livelihoods, the environment, but also to our economy. Now, while the science behind climate change is by now quite well understood, the economic consequences of climate change and climate change mitigation policies remain relatively under-researched. And this really motivated me to get involved and make some progress on these topics, as it is a field where one can really have an impact.
And tell me, Diego, your research shows how carbon pricing disproportionately affects poor households. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the key findings. So in my research, I study how the European emissions trading system affects the economy and also the environment, and I show the positives. I show that the system is successful at reducing emissions and also fosters green innovation, but this comes at an economic cost, and this turns out to be borne unequally across society. So poor households are more affected by the policy. And interestingly, it's not only because they have a higher energy expenditure share, they also face a more substantial fall in their incomes. And these indirect effects via income and employment play a crucial role in the transmission of the policy. And my findings suggest that they may be quantitatively even more important than the direct effects via energy prices.
And Diego Kensig, I believe that you have a very precise question for the panelists that you'd like to hear answered during Naomi's panel. What is that question?
Yeah, it's also inspired by my research, because one of the key policy implications from my work is that by redistributing some of the carbon revenues, we may be able to mitigate the inequality impacts of the policies. So my question for the panel would be, what do you think, what is the role that fiscal policy can play in supporting the most vulnerable in the green transition?
Very good question that Naomi will put to those panelists. Thank you so much, Diego Kensig. Over to you now, Naomi.
Thanks, Maeve, and thank you to Diego. I should certainly be putting that question to our panellists in just a moment. A reminder that we do want you to be a part of the debate. We will be taking questions later if we have the time. We definitely want to. And for those of you watching online, do send us your questions using Twitter or Slido with the hashtag EUBEF22, and I will do my best to put some of them to our speakers. So let's get started with our panel. And my first question: Russia's war in Ukraine has caused a huge surge in energy prices. Inflation is at record highs. The Commission has just downgraded its forecast. How can we secure the energy transition, climate neutrality by 2050 at this time of crisis and war at our borders without adversely affecting people's standard of living and purchasing power? I'll put that to you first, Vice President Dombrovskis.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and first of all, welcome to the Brussels Economic Forum. Indeed, the topic of this today's first panel, how to address climate change, is something which is actually not going away. While we are currently obviously focused on Russia's aggression against Ukraine, its implications, how to support Ukraine, but at the same time we cannot forget about climate change, because that's a challenge we are facing all together. So question now, indeed, how we can best do the climate and energy transition. In fact, Russia's aggression against Ukraine is focusing the minds. We are taking strategic decisions on rapidly phasing out our dependence on Russian fossil fuels. Of course, in short term, it means also the diversification to other suppliers, and we're talking, say, with Norway, which is the second largest supplier of natural gas. We are agreements that United States will step up their LNG supplies. We are talking with other suppliers, but it also means acceleration of the green transition. So actually, tomorrow, the European Commission will present what we call Repower EU plan, where we'll be outlining in more detail how we see this transitioning away from, well, first and foremost, Russia's fossil fuels, but fossil fuels in general, how we are seeing this happening, what are the sources of the financing, what role the recovery and resilience facility can play in speeding up this transition. In any case, we had already reconfirmed before that we stick with our climate goals. We aim for climate neutrality as of 2050. We are committed to our 55% emission reduction target by 2030. And if anything, this Russia's aggression is concentrating the minds and making sure that we need to move faster away from fossil fuels.
Thank you. So the repower plan to be revealed tomorrow, is that right?
Indeed.
Okay, thank you. Minister Ribera, the same question to you, please. We don't hear you at the moment. We hear you. We hear you. Loud and clear.
Thank you so much for this very interesting panel. And I would like to start by underlining and backing what Mrs. Yellen has said and what Diego has said. I think that it is very important to respond to this situation, taking into consideration the mid and long-term goals. So we need to respond to the very short-term needs, but we need to be consistent. Flexibility, but being consistent. And yes, I think that it is obvious that there is a divide, there is a strong different impact in low-income households and in the division between urban and rural, as the OECD has also stated very recently, dealing with the energy price spike. And I think that we need to pay attention to that. The response, the obvious response is we need to accelerate the energy transition, but we need to ensure a healthy balance between different aspects. So how we ensure healthy interdependence worldwide, so the supply chains that are not disrupted, and this implies also paying attention to the new materials we need in this new energy economy, and the strategic autonomy we need to build in, so to pay attention and to enjoy and use what we have in the surround, so the local dimension and how we can build industry and how we can build energy responses, but at the same time we need to pay attention to the social dimension. I think that this is key, and social dimension means workers with new opportunities, but workers in industries that do feel affected. Consumers is also very important. Consumers cannot be facing, as Diego was stating, such a big spike because the share of their incomes being invested in energy is much higher than in richer households. And to pay attention and to respond to that, we also need to pay attention to our own regulation. Gas price may change, but we need to ensure that people can benefit from the lower, predictable and stable prices of the renewable energy, the efficiency, and so on and so on. And for the time being, the regulation we have in the electricity markets do ensure a very unfair access to the benefits and to the cost of these tensions, this stress that we are going through. So yes, we need to pay attention to all these dimensions to be fair when responding from the institutions, how to ensure that in the short term, people also benefit and back what we need to put in place, which is the high-speed decarbonization of our economy, high-speed change of our energy system.
Minister, thank you. I'll turn now to you, Luc Triangle. The same question, please.
No, I think it's clear that industrial reality in Europe is already facing its most important and most fundamental change, and that's the green and digital transformation. And now we have also the war in Ukraine that comes on top of it, and that accelerates actually the challenges that are linked to this transformation. I think that the panel debate here is, and the topic is about how can we secure that no one is left behind. And in that sense, more than ever before, we believe as European industrial trade unions that indeed the social dimension has to be put equal to the technological challenges that are linked to this transformation. Because if we don't have the support of the people, if we don't have the support of the 25 million workers that are working in energy-intensive industries, in extractive industries, in the automotive industry, if they feel threatened in their jobs or in their future, then we will lose ground in Europe on support for the Green Deal. And there must be no misunderstanding. We fully support the objectives of the Green Deal and also the Fit for 55 package, but it has to be done in a fair and just way. And it cannot be a better day for us, because today and tomorrow we are launching our Just Transition Manifesto as Industrial Europe, because we believe that if we fail in the social dimension of the whole Green Deal, also now accelerated by the war, then we will also fail in the Green Deal. And in that sense, this topic of no one should be left behind is a slogan that we heard so much in the past years, that no region should be left behind and that the Green Deal must be first and foremost a social deal. We all heard that, but it has to be put into action. And in that sense, there is still work to do by the Commission, by all of us in delivering on the social dimension, because it cannot be limited to recommendations while the whole climate ambition is put into legislation. We also now need investments in the social dimension. If not, and the Minister of Spain knows it very well, then you might have some regional challenges. I will come back maybe to that topic later on, but there might be a two-speed process then going on in Europe, where some regions and some countries will move forward in this whole transformation. And next week we will be in Sweden, and this is a country where the transformation is really taking place already, very concrete, with positive effects on our employment. But I was also last week in Bulgaria, and that's exactly the opposite what's going on there, because we see mines closing, and actually, besides the social package for the miners, we don't see a new future appearing there for the children of these miners. Their future will be, hopefully not, but for the moment it is moving away from the region, from the community where they have been where they're born and where they have grown up. So there is a huge social dimension, and the urgency for the social dimension of the Green Deal, accelerated by the war, is there more than ever before.
Thank you. We will come back to the regions later in this discussion. I'd like to come now, though, to Ilham Kadri and to give you the same chance to respond to that question.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me well?
Very well.
It works? Okay, thank you. And thank you for having me. Well, listen, following Mr. Luc Triangle, in a way, the last 3 years alone have been so remarkably intense for the world, and I dare to say almost as intense as the entire last century, with a major pandemic, social unrest, catastrophic wildfires, several droughts and storms, and now an unbearably sad and completely unacceptable war. On the energy transition, coming back to your question, as a business leader, I believe we need to find the right balance between competitiveness, innovation, and equality. It is the planet, profit, and people approach we need to embrace, and it's not one or the other. And the leaving no one behind is about securing workers' rights and livelihood when shifting to sustainable production. It has to be affordable, if not you'll get the Gilets jaunes type of syndrome. And for this, we need to put inclusion at the heart of the EU Green Deal. And there will be no just transition with a focus only on environment issues and vice versa. So as leader, we need to raise awareness, pedagogy through what you are doing today, and constructive dialogue with the entire ecosystem on how we can achieve that just transition for all, help the industry to become competitive. There is a huge opportunity, huge, avenue for us to innovate in terms of clean energy offering and making it more innovative and more competitive and scaling it up, because we cannot do it alone. So I call for a Green Deal of inclusion. There is a necessity of putting that inclusion back at the heart of the EU Green Deal. And again, the just transition has to be a focus as much as the environmental transition. Back to you.
Thank you very much indeed. I just want to come back to you very quickly, Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, as the Commission representative. We heard there from Mr. Triangle saying no one left behind. It's a slogan we've heard a lot, but not enough's being done. A very quick response to that, if you could.
I think it's very clear that the green transition can only happen in a socially acceptable way. And we need to make sure that all the conditions for this are there. That's when designing the European Green Deal, we were very careful also on assessing impact on different regions, assessing impact on different people, and coming with proposals how to mitigate. On regional distribution, for example, that's where our Just Transition Fund and Just Transition Mechanism comes in. It's exactly to provide targeted support to diversify the economy in regions which are heavily dependent, for example, on fossil fuel extraction, like coal extraction. Clearly, we are setting the plans how we are moving away from coal, but clearly then we need to think about economic future of those regions and what other opportunities people will have. Then Mr. Triangle already mentioned that on the example of Sweden, but it's true across the EU, that all in all, green transition is going to have positive impact on jobs. So our estimates that by 2030, implementation of Fit for 55 package can bring us additional 1 million jobs. But the question is of transition, once again, because the qualifications of the green economy will not be exactly the same like qualifications of the current economy, and that's where our European skills agenda comes in, because it's true that we need to equip people with the right set of skills to actually transition and to be successful and to be able to use those job opportunities in a new green economy.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on now to solutions. And Diego Kanzik talked about redistributing some carbon revenues in a targeted way. I don't know what you think about that. So his question to you was, what role can fiscal policies play in supporting the most vulnerable in the green transition? And that question first to Minister Ribeiro. If I can have quick responses to this question, we want to get some questions from the audience. So that to you first, Minister Ribeiro, please.
I think that Diego is right. So I think that this is the short answer. And then I would like to elaborate a little bit more, because I think that we should not be opposing environment and social. We should be paying attention to create the social support, create the space, because as the unions used to say, there is no work in a dead planet. So we need to go along with the two dimensions in a very sensitive and smart manner. And this means using all the tools we count on. The social measures, so paying attention to the most vulnerable consumers, but I could make a comment on industry, traditional industry and new industry, skilling and reskilling. Secondly, I think that the fiscal space is key. So taxation has always been key when talking about building societies and building a fair response. And this means paying attention to what we tax, earmarking the destination of these resources, alleviating the fiscal charges when we are facing this tremendous challenge on energy prices, and promoting what we need. And this also has a fiscal response. And then on industry, I think that it is key, as I said, working on skilling and reskilling workers, promoting and facilitating the investment in new business opportunities. This means new workers' opportunities, both in services and industry, but going along with the traditional industry to be sure that they can update at the right speed. And finally, my final comment is, as I said before, I think that when talking about fiscal and taxation, we need to pay attention who is winning in this situation and who is losing in this situation. And something that undermines the credibility of the institutions is people having the impression that the winners are the same that they used to be, and that the ones to pay for these profits are the ones that used to be. So I think that we also need to pay attention to the fact that we are in a very unprecedented situation, and we need to rebalance a little bit the access to benefits and the access or the distribution of cost in this chaos, under this stress, to avoid having this lack of legitimacy being taken like that or being perceived like that by a large majority of our society. So yes, social and environmental aspects are clearly linked, and a good balance, a healthy balance, is the best recipe to have a sound, sustainable, and profitable economy. Those would be my comments.
Thank you. Okay, then the same to you. I don't know if you want to respond to that, but certainly to the question, Mr. Triangle.
Well, I think that we need to see, first of all, to the macro numbers, and we have to see to the micro solutions. So I fully agree that the macro number, Mr. Dombrovskis, might be positive, but what counts for us is the micro solutions on the ground in the regions where it happens. And in that sense, that's not guaranteed today, that where it will develop in the right way is the same region where jobs will disappear. So I think that's one point. Second point, it's really underlining the importance of the debates currently in the regions in Europe on regional just transition plans. They are ongoing and they are crucial. Because that's where we indeed have to measure the effects of the decarbonization agenda and the Green Deal, but where we also have to find solutions for a new future, for reindustrialization, for a new future for the communities and for the people which are affected by this transformation. Thirdly, that means that we will need more resources. The Just Transition Fund you mentioned also the Just Transition Mechanism. It's about billions of euro, but it's not enough, according to us, because it's very much focused on extractive industries, on coal mining regions and so on. But it's not only about these sectors. There are many more sectors. There are 13 million people working in the automotive sector. It's not our number. It's also a joint number with the industry. 2.6 to 2.8 million people will be affected by the electrification of our mobility cars, the electrification of our cars. So there is not only a skills agenda, because that's also something that we would like to highlight. It's not only about skills and retraining, it's also about finding new jobs for people that are losing their job in sectors that will disappear. So there are a lot of challenges, and for the moment, and I think I can be critical as well here. I think it's good intentions, but we still don't see enough actions on the social dimension of the Green Deal. And last point, and the keynote speaker this morning also said it, fair taxation. We need more finances. But who has to pay for that? Not those that are, first of all, already today touched most by the energy price crisis, by the higher fuel prices, by all that. No, I think there are other ways how we can go to a fairer taxation and where strong shoulders can burn maybe more of the needs today on financial resources. So I think the fairer taxation issue is absolutely also for Europe an important challenge.
Okay, thank you. Ilham Kadri, to you, please. Is fairer taxation the way forward?
Well, I mean, the Green Deal, and we need a holistic solution, is not just one solution, I believe. The Green Deal will only succeed if it has credibility among all stakeholders. And the COVID-19, the recent natural disaster, and simply, as it was said, the current gas prices crisis emphasizes the importance of this again. On addressing the most vulnerable, we need a focus on basic needs from transportation, housing, and identifying those vulnerable population and ways to compensate for additional costs and give them time to adapt is part of the just transition. And it requires, the regulators, the authorities, policies, but ad hoc solidarity mechanism. We need also to start anticipating catastrophic weather events, refugees and migration. I think the US Secretary said it is not only about the EU borders, it's beyond the EU, what will happen and come from Africa. So I think all of this has to be taught very well. So the Green Deal, again, will only succeed if it has credibility. We businesses, we have our part to play. At Solvay, we have embraced, for example, the Green Deal transition. But beyond that, we launched our Solvay One Planet last year with many initiatives around climate, obviously, resources like water and circularity, but centered around people. Because at the end of the day, the earth is the home for our people. And we have Solvay Care, which offer global social protection, regardless of your country of origin or residence. We launched our Solvay Solidarity Fund to support communities during COVID times, and now for other crises and leaving no one behind, or women who are very vulnerable communities in India and Rajasthan, due to COVID, they cultivate guar beans, which you may be using in your bio shampoo. But if you don't mobilize to support them during this crisis, they are facing major hardship. So yeah, we have our part to do, but it's not, we cannot do it alone again. And it's not just regulators vis-a-vis the private sector. I think you need a partnership and collaboration between public, private, and the communities to really make the Green Deal inclusive.
Thank you. I saw Minister Ribera nodding to your last remarks there. To you then, Vice President Dombrovskis, and I want to take some questions from the audience.
Indeed. Fiscal policy has an important role to play here, obviously. And I mentioned, for example, Just Transition Mechanism, Just Transition Fund, which is actually just a small part of the overall picture of the effort which is going to deal both with climate change and social implications of transition we are undertaking. So we also have a social climate fund coming from emission trading revenues. We have a recovery and resilience facility where 37% of the funding at least how to go to the green transition and additional 20% how to go to the digital transition. We have traditional EU cohesion policy where lots of funding once again is going to make green transition happen, and to happen it at a socially acceptable way. If you look at the spending in, for example, cohesion fund and regional development fund versus spending in European Social Fund Plus. And obviously there are many programs on member states' budgets themselves. Fair taxation clearly is also part of this picture, and I think what Secretary Yellen was probably highlighting is a question about the OECD agreement on global taxation, so on minimum taxation levels, and also on reallocation of taxing rights. As you know, we are implementing this agreement also in the EU, which, among other things, will help to raise additional revenues. But if you look at the fiscal policy, obviously there are other angles. For example, our energy taxation directive has not been changed for almost 20 years. It was last time changed in 2003. Obviously, many things have moved, and we need to adjust the tax structure of taxation structure of energy. There are many other aspects. So clearly, when devising our budgetary policies, we need to take into account what we are doing to fight the climate change and what we are doing to make it in a socially acceptable way.
Thank you very much. I do want to try and take some audience questions. We've got plenty coming in. One of them questions that's particularly coming through in different ways. One of the most voted questions is about the impact of the war on the green transition. Amit, for example, asked, with the new war, EU nations are increasing their defence budgets. Do you think this will affect the budget for climate actions? I have to put that to you, Vice President Dombrovskis. We're very tight on time, so I know there's so much to say, but a quick response, and then I want to get to another question.
It's clear that the Russia's aggression in Ukraine and the war which is taking place right now is not helping in neither regard. I think it's very understandable that countries in Europe, especially neighboring countries, are worried about their security, and there is just a need to increase defense spending. There is a need now to urgently diversify gas and oil supplies, where we probably would have thought about smoother transition without taking these kind of additional intermediate steps. War is forcing us to do this all, and the war in Ukraine itself, it's not only a humanitarian catastrophe, it's also a massive environmental disaster. So from all angles, I think it's clear that we need to put all our focus to stop the war, to provide all the support Ukraine needs, to put maximum pressure on Russia, including on sanctions, and hopefully finalizing the work on a six sanctions package. But as I said, that despite the war, we are not now resetting our green transition targets. We are sticking with our green transition targets and moving away from Russian fuels at the end of the day will mean moving away from all fossil fuels.
Thank you. I don't know if we have any questions from our audience. We have a roving mic roving the room. Oh, I see a hand over there. And if you'd like to say who your question is for. The mic is being passed.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very interesting panel. My name is Pedro Mendes, and my question is related, doesn't have to be to anyone in particular, but it will be regarding what we have mentioned before and also here now, which is about how Europeans are facing bravely the energy crisis that we're going through, an energy price crisis. And I've been advised to reduce the thermostats by 1 degree to help mitigate those efforts and also to contribute against the war effort that Putin is engaging. At the same time, we see that Shell and other oil companies are having record profits benefiting from the increase in energy prices. So I would like to ask if this is what we should call a social just transition, if it is responsible and just that the onus of responsibility of mitigating the crisis is in the consumer and not in the corporations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we seem to have lost our two of our panelists. They're back. I wanted to put that question, I think, to Ilham Kadri, CEO of Solvay. What's your answer to that?
Well, I think, first of all, everybody should mobilize to support, Ukraine and, this unbearable war, which I couldn't imagine it can happen in my generation, right, in Europe. Number two, there is much to be done to do the transition in terms of investment and innovation. And I think it was told not only from the technology innovation, but also from the upskilling and reskilling. And I think, major companies, and I'm not going to talk about the fossil fuel oil companies, but for our company, it's extremely important to double down in the Solvay One Planet. We are exiting coal. We did it in Germany. Moving to waste, by the way, so using waste wood, not recuperable. We are doing it in France, using your trash and your bin. We are trying to do it in Spain, as the Minister of Spain is with us today, or in Bulgaria, where we don't have access yet to renewable energy. So we need to double down on innovation and technology. And I'm a scientific person, we're a science company. Science will find solutions, and the ingenuity of our people will find solutions. Number two, is about, reskilling program. Around 94 million European workers will have to acquire new skills in the next 10 years as a result of automation and digitalization. And 21 million European workers will have to reorient themselves professionally to keep a job. And I think in the era of Industry 4.0, new skills have to be acquired. And we have our part to play. We have a Solvay Industrial Academy where we need to re-engineer, re-educate, learn and relearn, our own staff and other people to be able actually to reskill, our people around us. And this transformation will also create new jobs. So it's important to look at it as an opportunity. This renewable energy sector, the production, the organic farming, the circular economy, it's a huge opportunity for Europe and future workers, right? To really rebuild, new job creation avenues along with the green transformation. Back to you.
Thank you. Time is flying by. I think we've just got time for one more panel question. We did promise we'd come back to the regions. So how do we act then to protect the more vulnerable regions and member states so that nowhere is left behind? I'll come to you then, Mr. Triangle.
Yeah, I think this is really a key question, because it's about the future of the European Union, nothing less and nothing more. Because what we see today, and I invite you all to go to the website of the United Nations and to look to the top 20 countries with the predicted fastest population decline in the next 30 years. Well, if I'm not wrong, 16 or 17 of them are European, worldwide, population decline fastest. So, and I think 6 of them are European Union countries, including Bulgaria. They changed in 1991 with 9.2 million inhabitants. Today they are below 7 million, and the forecast by the UN is by 2050, 5.2. Yeah? So this is happening today inside the European Union, and this is a huge challenge, because this whole transformation debate about the Green Deal and about digitalization is also about creating a future for the industry of tomorrow in those regions. And what we see is that there is a risk of that Europe will not become more equal due to these transformations, but might become more unequal, where regions are indeed booming in the north, in the west of Europe, and in other parts of Europe as well, but where other regions will be left behind. And in that sense, the whole question is not about no one should be left behind. It's also a question about no region should be left behind in this whole transformation. And Vice President Dombrovskis already mentioned the funds that are available, but we really have to understand that this is about the political future of the EU. Because if you don't realize it there, then you create the ground for populism and for anti-European discourses. They gain ground on that dissatisfaction. So in that sense, this whole transformation, it's not only a technological challenge about getting the technologies and the breakthrough technologies to deliver on the targets. It's not even only a social agenda, but it's also a political agenda. We need to succeed on the Green Deal, and especially on the social dimension, and that in all regions in Europe.
The political future of the European Union. I'd like to come to you, Minister Ribera. It would be great to have the Spanish perspective and experience of this. Minister Ribera,
thank you. Yes, now I get. I would like to go along these very same lines, but to say that it is not only a technological or a financial issue, which is true. The two things are true, but it is quite intense on the ground. We need to invest. Making politics out of this means being very humble and investing on the ground and creating opportunities. And probably it's the big challenge. I think that building opportunities at the right speed is a more challenging thing. And there I agree with Mrs. Kadri on the need to talk with the business community, but very much in particular with the local communities. I think that building these opportunities is most of what we have already said, paying attention to the unequal, unfair impact in the divide rural-urban, as I said, but also in terms of households and the different decisions of incomes. So we need to facilitate the preparedness for the new economy, and this means skilling and reskilling and investing in new opportunities and updating the traditional ones, as I say. But it also means an active role for regulators. This means that what we do as regulators has an economic value. So we need to pay attention where this economic value goes and to what extent we need to introduce elements that do correct the traditional thing we have been saying, paying attention to references on economic and social impacts in the different territories, paying attention to the emotional impact for the regions that have been leading and building their prosperity for decades, for generations, around a concrete type of industry that is in change, and facilitating access and professional support to the means that do exist. So it is not only to have a big fund, it is that it is not easy to reach that fund, or it is not easy and there is no preparation to tackle with all the bureaucratic and financial and different aspects that the new opportunities to be built in these territories have to be responded. And finally, as I said, participation is key. Normally, people want to own their future, want to shape, understand what is the add value of each territory. So we, as representatives of institutions, or as representatives of institutions, I mean public institutions, but also unions or business, because you also corporates, you are also institutions, powerful institutions, need to go down to the to the ground to deal with the small communities that feel the threat, that feel the menace, what opportunities we can build, how we can help the changes in the regulation, in the permitting processes, in the access to professional support to build these opportunities, and so on and so on. And I think that, as I say, this is very intense in timing, and very intense, personally intense for anyone dealing with this aspect. But there is no shortcuts. I think that we need to go through these experiences, and that's what we have been doing during the last 3 years when dealing with coal. So in Spain, we have phased out 94% of our coal capacity in less than 3 years, and it has been going on the land, going to talk to the municipalities, to the workers, to the neighbors, to the business community, so to try to refigure the opportunities, and it takes time. But I think that we need to be quite respectful on these sentiments, and also on the building of these opportunities for our children and for the children of our children, as I said, but also for the current generations.
Thank you. So no shortcuts. Ms. Kadri, if I can come to you, the same question. And how do you see the role of business in this?
Yeah, indeed. I like the word, and I will adopt it. No shortcuts. Well, listen, the European region disproportionately are affected by the energy transition, right? There are clear differences in access to different sources of energy between the EU countries. And we are, we have assets all over Europe and all over the world. So indeed, we depend on the infrastructure in Spain, in Belgium, in the UK and elsewhere. And some countries allow for more renewable energy than others, such as hydropower in Sweden, or wind in Denmark, Belgium, or solar in the south of Spain. And other countries have less options to diversify. So the security of supply of energy is extremely essential for households and for industries. There is no economy and society without energy, actually. And that's what this unfortunate and sad and unbearable war is showing us. So my wisdom is that we need collaboration, we need an ecosystem, we need to be realistic and stay united going forward if we want to reach neutrality by 2050. The Solidarity Act between the EU member of states, right, in terms of energy, which is good. We need different, access to those solutions. And I can give you an example. We are using your waste, actually, to replace and exit coal in many countries. And I discovered that there is no EU waste legislation, and it's standing in the way. It's a patchwork of different definitions and rules across all member of states to ship waste, actually, from one place to another. Why not doing it if it can help you to exit coal and find another source of energy? So, and again, there is no shortcuts. There is a solution per location. It's true, as Madam Minister said, you need to be very pragmatic. You need to go hands-on on your assets, on your region, on your locality, to understand, is the land blessed with wind, solar, and do you have enough trash to run an asset or not? And then we need collaboration ecosystem, and don't forget our neighbors again. Africa is extremely important to Europe. Back to you.
Thank you. A huge amount to respond to, and I do want to come to you for the final word. We are very tight on time. We have to finish in seconds, but we heard there business depends on the infrastructure, on the secure supply of energy. There was the mention of EU legislation. A chance for you, a quick response, if you can, to that.
Maybe let me give a bit broader response, starting with this question of regional development, because I fully agree. We need to focus to ensure that there are economic opportunities in all EU member states and in all regions. Once again, Mr. Triangle used the example of Bulgaria, but we see it across Central Eastern European countries, which are experiencing brain drain, which are experiencing use drain, and the way to address it through providing possibilities in those countries and in those regions. So that's why also, for example, EU policies for promoting regional development like cohesion policy are so important. We know often when we are discussing EU budget, many are looking at the cohesion policy, as a policy to cut and to put money somewhere else. I think if we are serious about not letting regions behind, we should be stopping and actually reversing this kind of tendency. Well, on specific questions on secure energy supply, clearly, when we are developing our Green Deal and energy transition, security of supply is very clearly high on agenda, and clearly all this rollout is done in a way that takes this energy security into account. But I also wanted to come back to the question from the audience about this reducing the temperature by 1
very little
degree
time,
question. Yes,
on
so
that.
I'll be very brief. Yes, that's indeed in a recent European Commission's Repower EU communication, but it's true that the climate change is not happening only in conference of participants meetings. It's not happening only in Brussels, where the policy decisions are taken. We need both. We need those policy decisions, but we also need citizens' everyday action, everyday choices, which are also affecting climate change, because at the end of the day, we need to deal with this, all of us together. Thank you.
Thank you. The time has flown by, as we knew it would. An excellent discussion. I'm sure that you will agree, one to be continued. A huge thank you to all of our panellists for your time this morning, for your insight. It's been a great pleasure to discuss these crucial issues with you. Thank you. Thank you for your questions and involvement. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to get to them. We are now taking a lunch break for an hour. We will be back here at 13:30. Enjoy your lunch. We look forward to seeing you back here. And a very quick mention, if I may, for those of you who are here today, as you are, you can now go to the mezzanine room, where the book Growth for Good, Reshaping Capitalism to Save Humanity from Climate Catastrophe by Alessio Terzi is being presented by the author. That's